I built this company from the back of a pickup truck, and I never once asked anyone to hand me a single thing. That was 1981. I was 32 years old, newly married, and I had $1,100 to my name and a contract to haul landscaping materials for a housing development outside Columbus. My hands were cracked from the cold that winter. My wife, Loretta, packed my lunch every morning in a blue plastic container she bought at a garage sale for $0.25. We were not romanticizing poverty. We were just living inside it and working our way out. By the time my son was born, we had our first truck paid off and a second one on order. By the time he started kindergarten, we had 6 trucks, a small yard on the east side, and 3 full-time employees. By the time he graduated high school, Halverson Brothers Logistics, which was never brothers, just me, I liked how it sounded, had 42 trucks on the road in contracts with 4 of the largest construction firms in Central Ohio. My son's name is Preston. He's 34 now, and until about 18 months ago, I believed he was the best thing I had ever built. I want to say that clearly before I tell you the rest. I want you to understand how much I love that boy. How I coached his little league team even when I was running on 4 hours of sleep. How I sat in the bleachers at every single one of his cross-country meets, even the ones in the rain, even the ones where he finished ninth. How I paid for his business degree at Ohio State and then brought him into the company not because he was my son, but because I thought he had earned it. He started in dispatch. Learned the routes, learned the drivers, learned which clients needed hand-holding and which ones wanted you to just shut up and deliver on time. He was good at it. Patient. Sharp. He had Loretta's way with people. That warmth that made you feel like the most important person in the room. I started handing him more. Operations manager at 28. VP of development at 31. Last year I told him I was thinking seriously about retirement, that I wanted to transition fully to him by his 35th birthday. I told him the company would be his. The building, the fleet, the contracts, everything I had built in 40 years would pass to him. What I did not know was what he said to his wife the night after I told him that. I found out on a Thursday morning in March. I had driven into the office early, earlier than usual, because I couldn't sleep, and there's something about walking those floors before anyone else arrives that has always settled me. The smell of the place, coffee from the break room, diesel from the yard out back. The low hum of the refrigeration unit we keep for the perishable contracts. I know every sound that building makes. I was coming around the corner toward my office when I heard Preston's voice through the cracked door of the conference room. He must have come in early too, or maybe he had never left the night before. He was on the phone. His voice was low, but not low enough. I stopped walking. She keeps asking me when, and I keep telling her soon, he was saying. The old man made it official last week. The whole thing comes to me. I just have to wait him out a little longer. I stood very still. Kendra's right, he continued. Once the paperwork is done, once the transfer's in motion, there's nothing he can do about it. He thinks I actually care about this place. A short laugh. Not the laugh I knew. Something harder. He's handing me 40 years of his life, and he thinks it's because I'm loyal. He never once asked himself why I stuck around. I don't know how long I stood there. My hand was on the wall. I remember focusing on a water stain near the baseboard because I needed something to look at that wasn't moving. I had built that wall. Literally. I had laid the foundation of that building in 1994 with a contractor named Bob Dietrich, who is now dead, and I remember standing in the empty frame of it thinking, this is real. This is mine. I made this from nothing. And in that moment, listening to my son, I felt the floor tilt. I did not go into that conference room. I walked back to my truck. I sat in it for a long time in the parking lot with the engine off. The sun was just coming up over the tree line to the east, painting everything that pale orange color that always looks a little bit like it's on fire. I watched a starling land on the hood and then fly off. And then I made a decision. I would not confront him. Not yet. Not in anger. Because I have run a business for 40 years, and I know that the worst decisions are the ones you make when your hands are shaking. What I needed was a plan. I did not tell Loretta right away. That was the hardest part. We have been married for 51 years, and I have never kept anything from her that mattered. But I needed to be sure of what I had heard before I put that weight on her, so I carried it alone for about 2 weeks. Those were 2 very quiet weeks in my chest. In that time, I watched Preston more carefully. Not suspiciously, at least. I hope not visibly so. But carefully. The way you watch something you're not sure you're seeing correctly. The way you hold a document up to better light. And what I saw did not reassure me. He was attentive. Engaged. He sat in meetings and asked the right questions. He followed up with clients. On the surface, nothing had changed, but now that I was listening differently, I heard the slight impatience in his voice when we discussed timelines that extended past the transfer date. I noticed that when I mentioned long-term investments, the new fleet we were considering, the expansion into Kentucky, he would nod, but his eyes would go somewhere else. He was not thinking about the company's future. He was thinking about his inheritance. I called my attorney, Dennis, on a Tuesday afternoon and asked him to meet me for lunch. Dennis and I go back to 1989. He did my first real commercial contract. He has seen this company at its lowest and its highest, and he does not have a dramatic bone in his body, which is exactly why I trust him. I told him what I'd heard. I told him what I wanted to do. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're sure about this, Harold?" I told him I was. "Then let's make sure it holds," he said, and he picked up his sandwich like we had just discussed the weather. Within a month, Dennis had quietly restructured the terms of the ownership transfer. Nothing visible changed on the surface. I did not alter my behavior toward Preston. I still took him to lunch on Fridays. I still included him in every major decision. I still talked about the transition the same way I always had. But the legal architecture underneath had shifted completely. The transfer would now be conditional, not simply a gift of inheritance, but earned, measured against a 12-month operational benchmark. Preston would need to demonstrate not just competence, but character, retention of key staff, client satisfaction metrics, and most importantly, a documented commitment to the pension fund I had set up for the long-term employees, men and women who had given this company 15, 20, 25 years. If he met those benchmarks, the company was his, fully and legally. If he did not, control reverted to a trust I had established, managed by Dennis and 2 independent directors, with distributions to the employees' fund and to a vocational training nonprofit Loretta had worked with for years. Preston would receive nothing beyond his salary. I sat on that for 3 more weeks, and then I called my son into my office and closed the door. He came in relaxed. That was the first thing I noticed. He sat in the chair across from my desk the way he always does, one ankle crossed over the other knee, a coffee cup in his hand, comfortable, settled, like a man who knows how a room ends. "I've been thinking about the transition," I said, "and I've made some adjustments to the timeline." He nodded slowly. "Okay. What kind of adjustments?" "I'm moving it to a conditional structure," I said. 12 months of documented performance before the transfer finalizes. Something shifted in his face. Not obvious. Preston has always been controlled, but I saw it. A tightening around the eyes. A pause before the next breath. "Conditional on what?" he said. I walked him through it, calmly, specifically, without editorial. Operational benchmarks, staff metrics, pension commitments, client retention. I told him that Dennis had already drawn up the documents and that I would send them to him for review. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't trust me." I looked at him steadily. "I'm protecting what I built," I said. "That's always been my job." "For 40 years, he said. "You've been protecting it for 40 years, and now you're protecting it from me." "I'm protecting it from me. I'm protecting it so it can be yours," I said. "That's different." He stood up. He did not raise his voice, I'll give him that, but his jaw was set in a way I recognized from when he was a teenager and thought I was being unreasonable. "And if I don't agree to this," he said. I held his gaze. "Then we figure out something else." He left without another word. He did not slam the door. He just walked out, and for a moment the room felt very empty. That night I finally told Loretta. She sat at the kitchen table and listened to all of it without interrupting once, which is not her natural tendency. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I always worried about this." "About Preston?" "About us," she said. "About whether we gave him too much too easily. Whether he understood what the giving cost." I didn't have a good answer for that. I still don't, entirely. The first month after our conversation, Preston was cold. Not unprofessional, He was never that. But the warmth was absent. He did his job well, technically, but the Friday lunches stopped. The small conversations. He was performing compliance, and we both knew it. Month 2. Something started to change. I don't know if it was incremental or if there was a specific moment I missed, but I noticed he was staying later, not theatrically. He wasn't doing it for show, I don't think, but the lights in his office were on when I drove past at 7:30 on a Tuesday night. I saw him in the yard the following Saturday talking to one of our senior drivers, a man named Al who has been with the company for 22 years and who does not respond well to being managed from a distance. I watched from across the yard. Preston was leaning against the truck, not standing over Al, not consulting a clipboard, just talking, listening more than talking, actually. Al said something that made Preston laugh, genuinely, the laugh I knew, and then they shook hands. I went home and told Loretta about it. She said, "Don't read too much into one moment." She was right, of course. One conversation doesn't rebuild a man's character, but I kept watching. Month 3, he saved a contract I didn't even know was in jeopardy. One of our oldest clients, a regional construction group that had been with us since 2003, had been quietly shopping other carriers. Preston found out through the account manager, went out and met with their operations director personally, came back with a 3-year renewal at improved terms. He put the paperwork on my desk with no ceremony, no look at what I did, just left it there and went back to work. I sat with that paperwork for a while. Month 5, there was an incident with one of the younger drivers. A kid named, well, it doesn't matter what his name was. What matters is that he made a serious error in documentation on a time-sensitive haul. The kind of error that could have cost us a significant penalty and possibly the contract. The old Preston, the one I thought I knew before that Thursday morning in March, would have handled it quickly and efficiently, and the driver would have been out by the end of the week. Preston called the kid into his office. He sat with him for over an hour. He went through the documentation process step by step. He signed him to ride with Al for 3 weeks. He put him on a performance plan, yes, but one that was designed to succeed, not to document termination. The driver is still with us. He hasn't made an error since. I heard this from Al, not from Preston. At month 6, Preston came into my office. He sat down in the same chair he'd sat in when I first told him about the conditional transfer. But his posture was different. He wasn't crossed ankle comfortable. He was sitting forward, hands on his knees. "I owe you something," he said. I waited. "That conversation I had with Kendre, the night after you told me about the transfer." He stumped. Started again. "I don't know if you heard it, or if someone told you, or if you just knew. But I've spent the last 6 months understanding what I actually said, what I believed." He looked down at his hands. "I told her you were just an obstacle between me and what I was owed." Those were almost the exact words, and I believed them when I said them. The room was very quiet. "I didn't understand what this place is," he said. "I knew the numbers. I knew the contracts. I thought that was the same thing. It's not." He looked up. "It's Al. It's the pension fund. It's Bob Cranshaw's wife getting her husband home for dinner most nights because we run efficient routes. It's 22 people who trusted you, and then trusted me by extension, and I was thinking about it like it was an asset to liquidate." I didn't say anything for a while. "I'm not asking you to undo the conditions," he said. "I'm asking you to understand that I'm not doing this because I have to anymore. I'm doing it because I finally understand what I'm doing it for. There's a photograph on my desk that I've had for 30 years. It's the building, newly framed before the walls went up, just the skeleton of it. The beams and the cross members, the empty spaces where the windows would go. I'm standing in the middle of it, 30-something, squinting into the sun, holding a level. I look exhausted and I look happier than I have probably looked in any photograph taken since." I looked at that photograph for a moment after Preston finished speaking. Then I said, "Tell me about the Kentucky expansion. What would you do differently than I outlined in the fall?" He blinked. And then, slowly, he started talking. He talked for 40 minutes. He had done the research. He knew the carrier landscape, the fuel logistics, the labor market. He had already made 2 calls to potential clients out there, not because I'd asked him to, but because he'd been thinking about it on his own. At the end of the 40 minutes, I said, "Call Dennis tomorrow morning. Tell him you're ready to schedule the final review." Preston nodded. He stood up. He started toward the door and then he stopped, with his back to me, and I could see from the set of his shoulders that he was working on something. When he turned around, there was something in his face I hadn't seen since he was very young. Since he was the kid in the bleachers at his own grandfather's retirement party, watching the old man shake hands with people who had driven 2 hours to be there and trying to understand what that meant. "Dad," he said, "I know I can't give back the time when I thought about you the wrong way, but I want to spend the rest of the time doing it right." I looked at my son for a long moment. "Then we're wasting time standing here," I said. "The transfer finalized on a Thursday, 11 months after our first conversation." "Not 12. Dennis said Preston had cleared every benchmark by week 46, and there was no legal reason to wait. I did not make a speech. I did not throw a party. We signed the documents in Dennis's office with 2 witnesses and a pot of bad coffee. And afterward, Preston and I drove to the yard and walked it together, the same way his grandfather and I used to walk it on Sunday mornings when I was first starting out. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to." Loretta asked me that evening how I felt. I told her I felt like a man who had built something that was going to outlast him, which is all I ever wanted. She said, "You should have told me sooner." She's right. She usually is. I've spent 51 years learning that, and I imagine I'll spend whatever's left learning it still. What I know now at 63 is that the hardest thing is not building something. The hardest thing is trusting another person with what you built, and not knowing until the test comes whether that trust was placed correctly. I got lucky. My son came back to me. Not the version of him I had invented in my mind, the perfect heir, the grateful son, but the real one, the one who made a serious mistake in his heart and then spent a year quietly undoing it. That's not nothing. In my experience, that's most of what any of us can do.